Peace and blessings, and welcome to Catholic Crossroads, a Black Catholic's journey, where we discuss topics from a Black Catholic's perspective pertaining to social and spiritual issues that is happening locally, nationally, and globally. My name is Augustus Watts.
And I'm Tina Carter.
And we're part of the Chicago Black Catholics Alliance, an organization that looks to collaborate with Black Catholics in the Chicago and the Chicagoland area. So as you see, we are in the sanctuary of the historical Church of St. Elizabeth's. For those in the Black Catholic Chicago community know, St. Elizabeth's is a historically Black Catholic church where the remnants of Father Augustus Tolton lie. We are in the sanctuary and we have this picture here behind us painted by Alan Hicks, who is also a member of Our Lady of Africa Parish and is also an artist. We do this because the month of July represents the feast day of Augustus Tolton. Now, I understand he's not officially a saint, but as we see in the Catholic Church, saints are typically memorialized, or their feast days are dependent on when they die and gone into the heavenly kingdom. So the feast day would technically be July 9th.
Yeah, about
when his death would be. So we decided to dedicate this episode to this month of Augustus Tolton, who has inspired a lot of Black priests and priests in general in advancing causes of social justice within the church and outside of the church. But this month we're going to talk about what is freedom.
Yeah.
You know, how is freedom defined? Because this year we are on the precipice of 250 years of this country.
Yes.
And while many people, including our fearless leader, Donald Trump, is preparing for big celebrations of this 250-year anniversary of this country, what does that mean to Black people in general? What does that mean to non-white people in general? What does that mean to the Native people in general? Immigrants, Hispanics, and all the other people who this country was technically not built for, but we still reside in it. So obviously there is a question that we have to confront in regards to our position in this nation.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, as far as African American people, we are the descendants of Africans who were captured into slavery and brought over here in order to build this country, because if it wasn't for free slave labor, this country will not be where it is today.
Absolutely.
Even though we were forced to build this country, you know, we don't get the benefits of it. We don't reap the benefits of being full citizens. We are still marginalized, even though on paper we are American citizens. And so 250 years, what does that say for us?
Well, our founding fathers did call it an experiment. And this experiment of a democratic republic has been one that has seen a lot of changes, but also a lot of struggles. And in some ways, it's fitting that we both look at the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country, while also reflecting on the life and legacy of Father Augustus Tolton, because in a very real sense, he represents the struggle and overcoming of sorts of what was first expected of him as a former enslaved person, and the freedom that God gave him to ultimately become a priest. And that is despite the seminaries and religious leaders in this country at the time that told him that he was not free to do so. God found a way for him to be free to live out his vocation and what God called him to do. And so when we look at the question of freedom, we really have to think about what is freedom? Is it freedom from? Is it freedom towards? Is it both? Who is really truly free? There's, of course, economic freedom. There's spiritual freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Who decides who is free? Is it the leaders in our governments? Or is it our God-given right? Is it the laws that tell people who is free and who is not free? Or is it those inalienable rights that are enshrined in the Constitution?
Yeah, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
Right.
which is, very vague when you think about what is happiness. But liberty and life, when you're talking about basic life. So when you look back, or even look now on the, on the social structure and the social experiences of African American people, and you look at, the statistics and the demographics of where our people at today, we're almost at the bottom of every statistics when we're talking about income, or we're talking about education, or we're talking about incarceration, where we're leading in incarceration.
Right.
But all of these, metrics, deposit a negative result of where we're at in this country. And so if we're statistically and racially the least, the most impoverished, is that really freedom? Is that freedom from of anything? And when we thinking about like things like gentrification,
Right.
like, doesn't that restrict our freedom of movement of where we want to live, because of the fact that we're either forced out of our homes because of prices, because of cost of living, because of property taxes?
Right.
So where is the freedom in that? Yeah, obviously we do have, certain rights, but when we're talking about that living the American dream, the ability to earn a living and raise a family and, do all of these things that, television and media tells us that we can do in America,
Right.
is not available for a lot of African American people. And then we extend this to other non-white people like Hispanics and immigrants from Asia and South America and Africa that, some of them don't even get the benefits as well. And we're in this quandary where last week we celebrated Juneteenth,
Right.
which is, marks the end of slavery, as they say. But then there are these days between Juneteenth and the 4th of July that I think some scholars call the freedom gap.
Right.
And I think it's supposed to bring us back to a reality of the question that we're posing today. Are we free?
Yeah.
You know, so during these days between Juneteenth and July 4th, you know, we have to try to answer that question of, are we free? You know, are we allowed to live that American dream? And statistically, that doesn't look like that's the case.
Yeah, and that seems to be happening more and more. And I think one of the first things we have to do is look at what is freedom. Freedom is the power to, or right to act, speak, and think without any external hindrance, coercion, or restraint. It is the ability to make autonomous choices and live according to one's own values, balancing personal independence with the well-being of the community. That's freedom in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
The question becomes, are we able to live out that freedom? And when we think about freedom from, we're thinking about freedom from tyranny, slavery, freedom from fear, or unwanted government intrusion.
Mm.
When we think about freedom to, the freedom to access an education, the freedom to cast a vote, the freedom to pursue one's life goals, the freedom to practice one's faith however they see fit, or not to practice a faith. All of these freedoms are now coming under attack.
Well, you know, it's interesting you talked about freedom of religion, because just recently there was a commission that Trump built from an executive order last year called the Commission on Freedom Liberties.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of like gave their report
Mm-hmm.
and recommendations to Trump on what would be possible for these freedom liberties to be expressed, because there is a belief within the MAGA and Trump movement that religious liberties are being violated, which is kind of weird. But what's weird about it is they gave 12 recommendations. I'm not gonna go over all 12, but
Mm-hmm.
there was some interesting recommendations that was in this report. Now, what was strange about it was one of the recommendations was prioritizing anti-Semitism. You know, because there was a rise in anti-Semitic, you know, rhetoric and violence.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting was there was no mention of anti-Islamic
Right.
rhetoric or violence. Now, earlier this year, we just had a Islamic Center shooting in San Diego.
Right.
What was also interesting about this commission was there were reports, or not reports, but testimonies from people that, you know, that was supposedly having their religious liberties and freedoms violated, and a lot of them were valid. I think there was a case of a teacher public school teacher in Connecticut who had the crucifix on her desk, and I guess somebody from her school administration told her that she needed to take it down, or they were gonna, you know, reprimand her or fire her. And that's, and that is absolutely valid. However, nobody interviewed anybody from the Islamic Center in San Diego about their violent attack. Nobody asked the administration from the Nashville Christian school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody talked to anybody from Emmanuel AME in Charleston about the shooting that happened in 2015. And what was so fascinating, nobody talked about the Annunciation shooting that happened, Catholic Church, that happened in Minnesota.
Right.
Was it 23 or 24? Oh no,
yeah,
25.
It was early.
It was 20. It was 25.
Yeah.
Nobody talked to anybody from Annunciation Catholic Church about their shootings, and the person who did the shootings had a anti-Catholic manifesto.
Right.
And what was even surprising is there are 2 Catholic bishops on the commission, and they say nothing about it. And I think there's also a priest who was on the subcommittee in this commission. You mean to tell me you have 2 Catholic bishops, Cardinal Dolan and who's the other?
Not Barron.
And Barron.
Oh wow.
The 2 Catholic bishops, conservative Catholic bishops, and they say nothing about that shooting. And for some reason, the testimonies of church shootings and Christian shootings were kind of like not welcomed. And I thought that was very, very interesting. If you're really talking about freedom of religious liberties, like you would not include those things?
Yeah, and what's sad about that is, and we're certainly seeing this, and it's playing out in Texas certainly, with recent reports that starting in their next school year that students are going to be required to read the Bible in school. Now, reading the Bible in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're talking about using it for historical purposes or literary purposes. But I don't think that that's the premise behind this statewide mandate in Texas. And so the question becomes, when we look at these freedoms, are we truly living up to what the Constitution contains? So I actually took this book here, The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, from the United U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. This is the booklet that all immigrants who want to become U.S. citizens, they have to study from, one of several. And in it, in addition to the preamble, it talks about the Constitution and the First Amendment. And the First Amendment of the Constitution states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. It's right there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Mm-hmm. What that tells me is that while this speaks of Congress, I would assume that this also extends to the states. The states also cannot do this. Our government cannot decide what religion is right and what religion is not right, what religion should be practiced and what religion should not be practiced. That is up to individuals. And to pick and choose which faith is the true faith or the better faith or the great faith of this nation slaps in the face of what the founding fathers established, for those who are constitutionalists.
Yeah, well, and see, and also too, this goes against the essence of what true Christian evangelization should actually look like. Because for those who really attempt to practice true Christianity, this is not a religion that we force people to come to.
Exactly.
You have the freedom to be a follower of Christ or not. Jesus says it's in the Bible, you know, and basically one scripture passage, you know, Jesus says to his disciples, if a town rejects you, wipe the dust off your feet from that town and keep moving. Jesus never forced anybody to follow him.
Exactly.
He never forced anybody to say he was the Son of God. He always asked that question, who do you think that I am? And nobody should be forced to adhere to any religion, because when you do that, that becomes a cult. And the thing is that a lot of people, especially white Christian nationalists who have the influence of, you know, the powers that be, is turning Christianity into a cult.
What I would say is, and there's some things that we have to be careful about with that. Because if you look to our history, for example, when Christianity was forced upon certain groups, like, for example, the indigenous, for example, while some eventually did come to take God and Christ as their Lord and Savior, it became it to me warped the sense of who God and who Christ is. And to tell you quite honestly, I do not know what brand, or no, I take that back, I do know what brand of Christianity the Christian nationalists follow. And it is a type of Christianity that's wrapped in the American flag. The problem with wrapping Christianity into any national identity is that the very purity of that faith is warped and is now seen through, in this case, the red, white, and blue.
I would even push it even further, because their brand of religion is, to me, the religion of white supremacy.
Yes.
And
yes.
to me, their God is whiteness. It's not the true God of all. It's not the loving God that we try to understand in regards to being true followers of Christ, because if you ever read the Gospels, Jesus did everything in love.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is when you hear these conservative evangelical Christians, rarely do they talk about Jesus and love your enemy or turn the other cheek. They rarely talk about that. Oh, wait a minute. They only talk about it when we get shot by when we get shot by the police. That's that's the only time they talk about it. But other than that, they rarely talk about Jesus as a not just a spiritual leader, but also a social leader.
Right.
Somebody who cares for the poor and warns the rich about, obtaining all of these riches at the expense of poor people. We just had our first trillionaire in the world in Elon Musk.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we got millions of Americans who don't have homes.
Right.
We've got a number of percentage of Americans, both black and white, who live below the poverty line in multiple areas in this country.
Exactly. And it's funny you should mention the question about homes, because currently there is a bill, a bipartisan bill, which is a rare feat in these days in Congress, on housing and to address the housing crisis that's across the country that is at this date waiting for the president to sign. And he's refusing to sign it because he wants his voting suppression bill to pass, which they don't have the votes for. So when we look at this freedom, one of the other things that we have to look at is, are our governmental leaders expressing through their votes, through their actions, through their words, and through their deeds, the freedoms that we hold dear? And if they are not, you have the freedom to vote them out of office. Our freedoms are under attack. And we've seen this time and again throughout history. The right, for example, to voice your opinion and ideas without government censorship. And yet, we're finding that the government is finding all of these different ways to censor one's voice. We're finding different ways that the government is using the freedom, using these freedoms to make you afraid of the other. And it's by making you afraid of the other that's causing you to make decisions that are not in your best interest. Even our freedom of faith is coming into question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the right way to pray? Is it okay? Is it okay for me to pray one way or the other? Is it okay for me not to pray at all? Is it okay for a black man to be my spiritual leader?
Yeah.
Which was something that Father Tolton had to deal with.
Yeah, and I know you're referring to kind of like the internal conflict we have in the Catholic Church. Well, not the church in general, but some leaders, some clergy who would kind of look at Black Catholic celebration as antithetical to what a true Catholic worship should look like.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, Vatican II gave us that expression to celebrate in the natives' culture and language, which allows us to express the praise music that we would like to express in a Eucharistic celebration. And so, as Dr. Kim Limore famously called the liturgy police, would like to suppress, our expressions of spiritual shouting when we feel the Spirit come upon us, and we celebrate the Eucharist in a way where we're expressive. We're expressive people.
Right.
We need that type of joy in our lives because of the fact that we're living under constant danger, under a system of racism.
Right.
So in a lot of cases, our only comfort is the church. And if we, as Black people in general, follow the tenets of the true teachings of Christ, not just being good people,
right,
but also bringing forth the kingdom, which means that we have to fight for justice, not just for ourselves, but for others. And I know some people would push back on that, but that's the necessity that we have as a calling for followers of Christ.
Right.
And when we were talking about Father Augustus Tolton and in his journey, his hard journey into the priesthood, because of the fact that he received that calling as a child to be a priest. But there were people who tried to block him, who tried to tell him that he'll never be a priest.
Right.
But, and I think you referenced this, you said God found a way.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think God finds a way. If he wills it, it's gonna be done.
Yeah.
I don't care who says what. If God says Father Tolton's gonna be a priest, he's gonna be a priest. And sure enough, that's what happened.
Yeah.
He became a priest.
God makes a way out of no way.
Exactly. But I also say too, and you established this correctly, that Father Tolton represents who we are as Black people because of his journey, because of the hardship he had to go through just to obtain a priesthood.
Yeah.
We as Black people, we live under that. We have to work twice as hard because of the fact that we have been held back, for so many years. Our freedoms have been suppressed since the beginning of this country because we lived under slavery. Our ancestors lived under the system of slavery. And just because our ancestors, were able to, free us from physical bondage, the remnants of that legacy still live on because of the fact that in the system of slavery, we had we had very few families, and even the families that we did have, they didn't have the freedom to live wherever they want,
right,
or have their children live with them, because you can be sold at any time, I can be sold at any time,
Exactly.
Our children could be sold at any time, and we could do nothing about it. And so even after we were able to free ourselves from physical bondage, then we had to deal with white backlash in the form of mob lynchings of mostly Black men and some Black women, where we had to deal under constant pressure of racial violence. And going into the civil rights movement, we still are fighting that fight of today, trying to represent ourselves as just human beings, because anytime our rights get violated, there's always the question of, what did we do? What happened? Why did this young black man have a toy gun?
Why did this young Black man have a knife?
Yeah, exactly. And and then we just, in the case of the little boy, the little 2-year-old boy who got shot in the car,
Right.
because his mom was accused stealing Pampers, maybe $10, and that was the price of that boy's life, of the police trying to chase this person down and shooting into the car with a 2-year-old baby.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's reprimanded. Nobody lost their job over it. So where is the freedom in that? And I want to talk about one more thing about democracy, because that seems to tie into what is freedom, because of the fact that we are supposed to have this opportunity to form the government that we want to form through elections.
Right.
But as you stated, and correctly so, our choice to vote is even under attack. But going even beyond that, if you look at the political system basically is set up against us as Black people, as people in general, as working class people, because when you have the system of capitalism that controls the whole gambit of politics, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, you know, this works against the common interest of working class people, because the one thing they can always do is price us out of everything.
Yeah.
And this is how they do stuff like gentrification. This is how they can put us in jail for taxes or several other things that they can legally do. And this is why I say the system is not broken. I mean, that's just me.
And you make a valid point. Who was this system designed for? When we look at who were the men in the room when this 250-year-old experiment got started, they were white male landowners. Women were not included. Certainly African Americans or Negroes were not included. Indigenous were not included. And those who had no land were not included. So when they wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Who were they talking about? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. Who are they talking about here? Are they talking about me?
Nope.
Are they talking about you?
Nope.
Are they talking about our indigenous brothers and sisters?
Absolutely not. We're talking about rich, white, male landowners.
But in these words, they give us the tools that we need to go about and affect change. Not only in the words that I just read, but in the Constitution and in the amendments that are all listed. You see, despite what our current governmental leaders believe or ascertain, this document is a living document. It doesn't live in the 1790s or even 1776 when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. It lives today. So when we look at our freedoms, are we truly beholden to a government that will, at whatever whim of whatever president at whatever time in history deems that we are free or not free? Or is it through the power of the people, the power to vote, the power that our freedoms give us to speak out against injustice? It is that spiritual freedom that is fundamentally tied to objective moral truth. And that moral truth is that we are all children of God. That God has given us these freedoms through our very lives. And no man, no government on earth has the right to take our freedoms away so long as we live in the freedom of God, so long as we live in the freedom that God loves us and that we follow God's commandments and mandates. That's the number one freedom. And through that freedom, all other freedoms come through.
Yeah, well, you know, when you think about the Constitution, and I believe this current administration is trying to outdo the slave-holding founders, because apparently they just didn't go far enough, because we've got our current president who wants to strike down certain constitutional protections, you know, like birthright citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
And also too, going back to the religious commission, the Commission on Religious Liberty, they also want to abolish the Establishment Clause, and they also want to repeal the Johnson Amendment, which is part of their request. Now, for those who don't know, there is a certain tax code called the Johnson Amendment, where it prohibits 501c3 organizations to financially support or oppose political candidates. They want to get rid of that. So it's bad enough that corporations are buying elections.
Pretty much.
Now you want the churches to buy elections now?
Yes, because Citizens United, as we all know, was probably the worst thing that the Supreme Court upheld. Because what that has basically done is it's injected all of this dark money into our political process. And the reality is that a lot of faith-based organizations and churches for that matter, in some form or fashion has supported political leaders to their liking throughout history. That's always kind of happened.
But they are restricted.
Yeah,
to fund them.
Yeah, they're restricted to fund them. I mean, even during the '64 election, Dr. King, who at that point never formally, talked about one particular candidate over another. He made it a point to sit up there and say something about Barry Goldwater. Of course, Johnson in that election won in a landslide, or electoral landslide anyway. But to now turn churches into political organizations, there's a reason why there is a separation of church and state. And we have to be very careful about the slippery slope that we're about to slide down if that takes root. Because then what will happen, and we're seeing it happen a little bit now, the government then can determine that I may want to fund this religious organization and not that religious organization. I may want to fund that religious school but not that religious school. And we're starting to see some of that happening now. So if we take it to this next level, that goes into a deeper corruption of what faith, what religion, what these churches can and will do. Because at the end of the day, church has to pay for lights. They have to pay, they have to worry about water, grounds, building, and if you can get the federal government to help you on that by supporting, some religious leaders are willing to take that leap of faith.
Well, yeah, that's interesting when you talking about the business side of church, because this is what prompts a lot of these religious and church organizations to take, government money. And I think when, was it Bush II who did the faith-based initiative, where government money was used to fund certain churches, that was probably the start of the slippery slope of giving money to churches. But now you're going to eliminate the barrier of just saying that, okay, a church can now fund a certain candidate or oppose a certain candidate, which, is going to completely eliminate the wall of separation, which Thomas Jefferson, former president, had coined because of the fact that he wrote a letter to a Baptist church in Massachusetts in 1802 in regards to the wall of separation between church and state. And I remember watching that whole thing with the commission, the Religious Liberty Commission, where the guy who runs it, he's the Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, and he kept saying, it's not in the Constitution, not in the Constitution. Well, one of your founding forefathers coined that phrase. So it constitutionally, and Thomas Jefferson was one of the signers.
He was.
So technically, in essence, word-wise it wasn't in there, but one of your founders did use that phrase. But going back to like our freedoms, when we're talking about economic freedom, and we're talking about, pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, even though we don't have any boots to pull our bootstraps up from, because we've been adhered to these different barriers in our lives that hinder us from getting to these places. And I know some people will say, well, certain black people have gone on to these expectations, but how many? Because the masses of us haven't reached Oprah Winfrey level. We haven't reached Barack Obama level. We haven't reached any of those levels that you want to prop up as, symbols of black excellence, because of the fact that when you look at the whole of our existence in this country, we're not doing very good. When we're talking about education, when we're talking about health, when we're talking about economics, none of that stuff. Now, I know certain people want to say, well, so here's the thing, and I always challenge people, because there have been people who have said that racism is not a big thing, or it doesn't exist. So the one question I ask is, do you believe that black people are at the bottom negatively of every metric of economics, home ownership, health, education? And some of them say yes. So obviously there's two reasons behind that. Either we're just inferior people, or there's a system of racism. Take your choice.
It's funny you should mention that. So in the 1960s, after Dr. King, the kids, there was this crusade, I believe it was in Montgomery.
The Children's Crusade?
The Children's Crusade, right. And the children, they marched out of churches and every place, and they were demonstrating. And there were fire hoses sprayed across them, and you saw kids being swept up by these fire hoses. You saw, in some cases, the skin, because of the power of the water, being peeled off. You saw kids sliding down the street. So, and this was televised. It forced John F. Kennedy at the time to come on national TV that night. And he posed this question, and I'm paraphrasing: would any of you trade places with them? Those of you who say that they are free, they're rabble-rousers, what are they complaining about? There's no racism. Would you trade places with them? That question came up again, and I see variants of that question constantly coming up. And the question becomes, for those of you who say that racism doesn't exist, would you trade places? By and large, most people would say no.
Of course not. I think Chris Rock had a joke that said, he said, there's not one white man that would trade places with me, and I'm rich.
Right.
So.
And I mean, even Lyndon Baines Johnson, he said, and I'm gonna paraphrase again, you take the well-to-do or working-class black man and the poor white man, and you convince that poor white man that you're better than this black man, you can pick his pocket. Heck, he'll probably sit up there and give you what's in his pocket because you convinced him that he's better than them.
Yep.
And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing that there are people out there who would use your fear of the other to take your freedoms away.
Or what little freedoms you have.
Right. And as they are taking and you are actually giving your freedom to them because you're so focused on what you think the other has, or what you think the other is taking from you. And that's a loss of freedom, certainly a loss of freedom in God. And definitely a loss of freedom of your own agency.
Well, as we close out, I think the question should be expanded to not just are we free, but who is free? When we look at economics, statistically, only 1% is free.
Right.
When we look at socially, there are many who will be classified as white who are free, and all those non-white people, black, brown, Asian, are not free.
Right.
When we're talking about the history of it, when we look at it by gender, mostly men, particularly white men, are free.
Straight
White men are free.
or cis.
When we're talking about very few women who are free, mostly white women, when we're looking at it from different standpoints. So, in essence, not everybody's free.
Right.
So, we have to kind of deal with that. Any final thoughts?
Yes, one. Part of freedom means that we have to be also spiritually free. And to be spiritually free is to see reality as God sees it, and to live in alignment with that divine design. So freedom begins with God. Freedom begins with seeing through God's eyes and living accordingly. It is only then that we are truly free.
Amen. Well, that is our show for the month. So if you're watching this video, like, share, and subscribe to our page here. Give us a comment. Let us know what you think of this video. We also have a presence on social media in regards to Facebook and the Twitter or X page, Chicago Black Catholics Alliance. Subscribe, and follow us through those social media modems as well. We also have an electronic publication called The Pulse of Black Catholic Chicago, which we distribute every month, where we write articles concerning Black Catholics, the Black community, and several other things that affect, our lives in this society. We also give events, ministries, and things around the Black Catholic community, not just in Chicago, but all over the country. When we think about how we can do ministry online or have events online. So subscribe to our publication, and the email will be in the description. So send us an email and write us, what you think about this, and if you want to subscribe to the Pulse of Black Catholic Chicago. So That is our show. And Tina, would you lead us out in prayer?
And may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may his light shine upon you and bring you peace. And may the freedom that God has given us lead us to freedom for all. Father Tolton, pray for us.
Pray for us.